And I think there are two things. Perhaps in terms of the objectives, if we believe that this productivity gap is due to a gap in terms of policies, and in particular in terms of structural policies, the way labor markets, product markets, financial markets, functioning, then we have to measure these policies and define our objectives in terms of these policies, not in terms of the objectives. And many of the way the Lisbon agenda was defined actually was already in terms of outcomes, not in terms of policies. You have to first define the instruments, the levers, before you get to the outcomes, right? Mm-hmm. But I'm not saying that's easy, because sometimes it's very easy to measure these institutions. It's always very tricky to measure an institution, something which is very sort of qualitative, you put it into a number. But for instance, the OECD has been doing a lot of work precisely in this area, and to benchmark countries in terms of the level of reforms, levels of structural policies. So this is one thing, the way the objectives were defined. I think another important issue is actually the connections or the complementarities across policies. It's very difficult. Let's give you, for instance, a very precise example. Suppose that you want to address the problem of aging and the problem increasing expenditures associated with pensions. Okay, and you do all these calculations. In the end, what really makes a difference is when you index your age of retirement on the increase in life expectancy. People live longer. Hopefully, they live longer in good health. They should work longer, because otherwise it's just not sustainable, right? But these reforms, suppose you do this reform, but the labor market is not delivering in terms of generating jobs for these older workers. For instance, in France, is a country where it's very difficult when you lose your job when you are around 50, 55, to find another job. It's almost impossible.
Here the same.
In Spain, it's perhaps the same. So if you do reform on the pension system and the labor market is not delivering, actually you are just replacing pensions by unemployment benefits. From the point of view of the public, the budget doesn't make things really better in some sense. So these complementarities, I think, are very important, and that was a little bit overlooked when the Lisbon agenda was defined. A very important sort of a link or connection was actually related with the macroeconomic stabilization and actually the fact that many countries now are in the euro area with different levels of development, different levels of specialization. I'm not going to sort of talk about Greece, my country, Portugal, or even Spain, and compare these countries with countries like France and Germany. The way you define financial stabilization, macroeconomic stabilization, has implications for the structure of the economy and for the growth potential of the economy. And again, you have to be coherent. If you want to be in the Eurozone, which protects you in some sense against financial instability, provides in principle lower interest rates, so bad access to credit, fine, you have to take that into consideration and when you define your vision for the growth potential of the economy, because if you are hindering the growth potential of the economy just because of financial stability, will not be sustainable, like we are seeing now. It is true that we are perhaps experiencing now one of the worst and most tough and difficult fiscal adjustment phases of, I think, in modern history. What we are seeing now is perhaps something unique, because the situation before the crisis was that generating fiscal surplus were needed in order to face these long-term pressures associated with pensions, healthcare, all the social pressures. After the crisis, we end up actually with 10, 20, even on average, I think for the OECD on average, we have like 30 percentage points increase in the level of the ratio of public debt to GDP. So this need for fiscal consolidation is going to be, the challenge associated with this fiscal consolidation is going to be really very, very great. Mm-hmm. The tendency for governments to, in some sense, for instance, adopt uniform measures, cut in a sort of in the same way everywhere, or perhaps in some sense, displace the problem by, for instance, putting some services at regional level, services that were previously sort of produced by the central government, just sort of allocated to regions without not really ensuring that the funds are there for providing the mandate. So unfunded mandates, what we call in regional economics, may sort of appear. So this will create a very big sort of issue. And of course, this need for, we've been talking now for more than half an hour about innovation, the role of public sector, and at the same time, we are saying now that the governments will be in a very, very tight constraint. How can you do this? How can you do sort of solve this sort of problem? I think what's going to happen in the next sort of years and even decades is that even every euro that you're going to spend by the public sector is going to be scrutinized in a very sort of a close way, and you have to make really the most out of this euro that you're going to spend. So in some sense, it's doing more with less, and in order to achieve this, of course, governments have to pursue, in a very firm way, certain sort of reforms in terms of public expenditures, the way they are allocated, the way they are decided, the way that they are implemented. And again, I think, as Karen said, this regional level is very important, because how can you decide, or can you see or assess when you make an investment that this €1 of investment in a road or in a school or in a university is complemented by all the other investments, all the other assets that make the whole thing works, is by doing that at the appropriate level, and that is the regional level. You cannot do this kind of assessment at the very aggregated level or in a sectoral basis. You have to coordinate all these sectoral investment policies, and you have to do that at the right level, which is the regional level. But this, this is the only way I see, in some sense, in order to maximize the return on each euro that we are going to invest, which is going to be really very precious in some sense over the next decades. It's really by maximizing these complementarities, these synergies across all sectors of the board, and that has to be done at the regional level. But it's true, you're right, the situation is going to be very, very, very challenging in the years to come.